Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to give it just a minute or two and let people trickle in, but it is top of the hour and we're going to kick off our next traffic session. We're excited today to be here. All right, what am I at? We are recording. So those that cannot join live but registered will be able to watch the session later. All right. We will jump right into it. Everybody has joined that is here. My name is Lindsay Valdez, and I am the VP of Audience Strategy at Freestar. I work with our publishers on audience growth, traffic strategies, and I am so excited today to welcome Brett Farmelo from Turkle to join us to take us through today's topic, which is Google's helpful content update and how to create content for that. Brett, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Freestar's traffic sessions.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, all. Yeah, and excited to talk about today's topic. It should be a fun one. So just to introduce myself, I've got, here's the bullet points here. So I'm a CEO and SEO person. I majored in accounting. I'm out here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I went to University of Arizona. Coming out of college, I founded a website called pursuethepassion.com, where I traveled around the country in an RV, documenting people's career paths for other college students to take a look at for career inspiration and career guidance. Wrote a book about that, and also had the site acquired. Went to go work for the acquiring company for a few years, and ultimately I went to go start my own agency. One of my first clients was the actor Hugh Jackman, and helped him launch a charitable coffee company that was acquired by Keurig. That was really fun, and ultimately morphed into starting an SEO agency called Marketers. Got the website to rank on the first page of Google for the term digital marketing company, and actually started a digital marketing company. Sold that in December of 2021 to ultimately start Turkle. Turkle is a visibility platform that connects publishers with subject matter experts for Q&A content. And so that's what I'm currently focused on. And also contribute content to Fast Company, American Express, GoDaddy, and many more different publications. So I'm kind of out the game when it comes to SEO, but still geek out on all things SEO. And one thing in particular that I've been really focused on is the Google helpful content update. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you want to switch to the next slide.
That is a great list. I will quickly, I forgot to mention, we do have a chat open. If you have questions throughout this presentation, you can either drop them in the chat if you're comfortable coming on screen or saying your question, that's fine too, but we definitely just encourage any sort of discussions around this as he goes through.
Yeah, Lindsay told me this was supposed to be fun and informal, so we'll make that happen. So in terms of what we're talking about today, I think that when I asked Lindsay for the list of some different sites or representation of the people who would be here today, I was like, uh-oh, I think I should be learning instead of teaching. But I'm impressed with a lot of the sites that everyone's operating and developing. And in terms of what I'm going to be talking about today, the helpful content update, what is it? Why is people first content important? How to create content that search engines want? Next steps, and then most importantly, the Q&A portion. So like Lindsay was talking about, put any kind of questions into the Q&A and we'll get those addressed. Cool. So helpful content. What is the helpful content update? So next slide. So one of the things that we're going to be talking a lot about today is EEAT, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. I think that this is probably an acronym that many people on this call are familiar with, but it's kind of the baseline for what this update's all about. So we'll be returning to this throughout the presentation. Cool. And here's the problem. The problem is that people aren't seeing original helpful content that's written by people, for people in search results. And as a result, trust in Google is declining. And so you think back to this when I was running my SEO agency in 2018, there was about 18,000 marketing agencies in the US. And then by the time I sold my agency, there was more marketing agencies than coffee shops in the United States. So there's over 60,000. And so when you think about the population of search engine result pages, you have thousands and thousands of people who are essentially trying to get visibility in these systems, and Google wanted to put a stop to that. And so that's what this helpful content update is all about, is really creating good content and getting that to rank. Cool. And so the couple things here that I'll highlight going deeper into this problem: lack of expertise. So publishers producing lots of content on lots of different topics in hopes that some of it might actually rank. And so a lot of noise, a lot of clutter that's happening in search engine result pages. An example of this is on the right, where you have a site that might be talking about automotive, home decor, finance, blockchain, food. What is this website about? And so getting really focused in terms of expertise is one of the areas that they wanted to adjust and address in this update. Next slide. Lack of authority. And so publishers are mainly summarizing what others are having to say without adding more value. Great example here, how to create great content. You have the ultimate result, then you have 9 tips. I'm going to outdo you with 11 tips. And it's just this game where you're not adding more to the conversation. You're just trying to one up the next person to go up in the rankings. And so you think about this, and the lack of authority really goes back to who's creating this content. At our SEO agency, admittedly, we had people who were fresh out of school creating content on everything from trenchless pipelining systems to RV rentals. And you have, some person who's fresh out of college that has to get educated on the space and isn't able to go really in depth in terms of the authority on this topic. So that's kind of the nature of the landscape of what's happening today.
Yes, and in some sense, don't you feel like we're in the place that we are with Google and all these changes because it was somewhat brought on by publishers, all targeting things like what time does the Super Bowl start, instead of trying to evolve like helpful content in the beginning? And now things are changing very quickly.
Yeah, it's just lucrative. Like, if you rank well in search engines, you're going to get great traffic and you're going to see results from that. So, why wouldn't you try to feed the system and grow the business? So totally get it. But lack of authority is one thing. And then on the next slide, we're talking about lack of trust as well. So, going all the way back to when Jasper was Jarvis and doing a lot of the generative AI pieces before ChatGPT had come about, you have a lot of publishers who are looking to essentially create more content by leveraging automation and producing content on many different topics. And so I think that there's still a lot of dust to settle when it comes to AI and content, especially in the generative piece. Google's been pretty vocal to say that generative AI content, they don't have anything against it per se. But you're also seeing this awkward navigation of it from a publisher perspective. The other day, I actually saw a blog article where the author was actually ChatGPT, and they just blatantly said that the blog post author was ChatGPT.
Wow.
And so you see a lot of that stuff. And I actually thought, leaning into the trust component, I actually thought that was a decent move to disclose that. So the lack of trust is another thing that is really at the core of this update.
That's funny.
So solution is pretty much this helpful content update, having content that's written by people for people in search results rather than just plain old search engine content. And so on the next slide, we'll talk about what is people first content. So if you were to Google helpful content update and look at the Google announcement from last August, it's a really short little paragraph. And then it's like, what is people first content? So really, if you're looking for helpful content and what it means, it really just means people first content. And so we're going to dive a little deeper into those. So people first content definition means content that's created primarily for people and not to manipulate search engine rankings. So pretty straightforward. So this is what we're going to be spending the majority of our time today, is basically posing a bunch of questions. How do you self-assess your content? And there's a variety of different questions that Google recommends that you ask about your content. My hope is that you would take some of these questions and incorporate it into your editorial guidelines so that when your teams are creating content, you're asking yourself some of these questions internally to make sure that you're essentially going in the direction that that Google and search engines would want to see you go. So we're going to be talking about content and quality questions, expertise questions, some presentation and production questions, and then going into some stuff about do's and don'ts. Cool. So content and quality. Here's a variety of different questions that I basically just pulled directly from a variety of information that Google had put out there for publishers. And so each one of these questions is a good checklist item to ask yourself when actually creating content. So very first one, is it original content? Is there actual information, research, analysis that's been conducted in it? Does the content provide a substantial or complete description of the topic? There's nothing worse than clicking on a result and seeing 300, 400 words and leaving a little bit more to be desired in that. So does it actually cover the topic as a whole? Is there insightful analysis or interesting information that's beyond the obvious? So again, if this piece of content is being written by someone that doesn't have the authority in the space, maybe they're not able to go in depth as much as someone who has expertise would be able to go. Does it avoid copying or rewriting sources? Is there a descriptive, helpful heading or title? That's one thing that I think is very welcome about this update, is so many titles that you see in search engine result pages are in this next bullet point shocking in nature. You know, you click on a result and it's like, the top 10 tips, 11 will blow you away, you know, like all this stuff that's really click worthy. I think that's been a little overdone, and Google's looking to adjust that a little bit. Couple other questions here. Would you bookmark, share, or recommend this content? And then does the content provide substantial value when compared to other pages in search results? So I think that's how Google defines content quality. And all these questions are something that you could ask yourself before ultimately hitting publish.
A couple of things right here, if you don't mind. I read something with all the recent AI discussions that it might have been with like Rand Fishkin maybe, but as AI is like the new baseline, like the very worst case scenario should be Chat GPT's version or Jasper's version, just as like standard. So if you can't at least do that, like why bother, number one. And then to go to bullet number 3, insightful analysis or something above that, what an AI might be able to do to bring a certain level of quality to that.
That's a great point, because you're right, like that is the baseline. And if you look at Google's BARD announcement and you look at the future of what search engines actually look like, you have the generative piece that's being written out by Google. So that is the baseline. And so for you to actually appear alongside that generative result, you've got to add more to the conversation. And in addition, you have to be the human created content that helps validate the AI portion that's being spit out, so that search engines now have equipped searchers with a full perspective on their query. And so the generative piece is there, but they don't want to take full responsibility for that generative piece because we've seen some of the limitations with AI. And so now they need helpful content to help support that, so the searcher has all the different options and information.
And I can't tell you, lastly, before we move forward, I can't tell you how many times we work with publishers or I'm working with someone and they're worried about this like tiny fraction of CLS or a fraction of speed. And they have like an article that only like half covers the topic and is, you know, it's off putting the amount of time we spend on certain things, when this right here, the screen that you're looking at, matters so much to your actual performance in the search results. Love it.
Good call out. Cool. So expertise questions. I'm going to jam through these pretty quickly. So does the content present information in a way that makes you want to trust it? Is there clear sourcing evidence of the expertise involved in the background about the author? Is there an author page or a site about page? This is an example I wanted to call out. I was looking through, I think it was like a latest hairstyle website, and I saw the author have an excellent author page. And basically you click on, you know, who authored this post, and bam, their bio pops up in a little pop-up. And it's like 15 years of experience as a hairdresser and have been running this site, and went to this college and majored in this, and the whole background about the author was just so impressive and gave you that feeling of expertise before you even read the information. And so I think that is going to be so important when it comes to the content itself. Is before you even get to the content, I think crawlers and search engines are going to look at that author and say, who authored this piece, before we actually read the piece and factor that into rankings. And so if you were really looking to get a leg up on SEO stuff and run some experiments with this, be really interesting to essentially recruit real experts to author articles and see if those outperform the ones that you're able to do with just an author that might not have that credibility. So I wanted to give a shout out to whoever that hairdresser was, and and they're doing a good job. A couple other bullet points here is the site producing the content well trusted or widely recognized as an authority on its topic. I think that there's a variety of different factors that go into that, whether that's backlinks or domain authority and whatever you want to call it. But really, is this a well-trusted website? And once you have that level of foundation, then I think that traffic kind of follows after that, as long as the content is good. Is the content written by an expert or enthusiast who knows the topic really well? And then are there any factual errors in the content as well? Because you wouldn't really see that from some expert that didn't have to do the research and look through a bunch of different, other pieces of content to produce it. Most experts are writing their stuff and, making it happen from the head. So those are some good questions as well. And then last one here is presentation and production questions. So does the content have any spelling issues? Is the content produced well, or does it appear sloppy or hastily produced? Does the content have an excessive amount of ads that distract them or interfere from the main content? So you had mentioned the CLS issues and things like that. So obviously that's top of mind. And then does the content display well for mobile devices when viewed on them? What's your Google Search Console saying? Are there any errors or issues that need to be addressed in regards to mobile devices? So that's some of the presentation and production questions to ask as well.
These are great.
Cool. So the approach. So what to do now? What are some of the do's? What are some of the don'ts? And what are some of the questions that you could ultimately incorporate into editorial guidelines?
We talked a lot too about updating old content. So think of this as when you create new content, publishers, but also for when you go back and refresh, you can also incorporate some of these as you're like rebuilding your posts.
Definitely. Right. Yeah, so some more questions. And again, I think that the vision for this is to copy paste some of these questions, give it to an editor, and really it's cross-checking this so that you're asking these questions before you ultimately press publish. And so the very first question here is, do you have an audience who would find the content useful if they came directly to your homepage and then saw this, post and clicked on it, and does it fit well in that? And I know when we were running SEO, doing the SEO agency, a lot of my arguments would be, oh, well, they might not even see the homepage. The entry point is this blog post that they Googled, they came to the blog post, and bam, they're on their way. And really, I guess to counter that philosophy, if you went to the homepage and then discovered that post, how well does that fit into the overall theme of the site? And does that core audience who comes to the homepage, would they find that content actually useful? So that's one good checklist item. Does your content clearly demonstrate firsthand experience and a depth of knowledge? Does your site have a primary purpose or focus? I think that for this audience, the answer is yes. After reading your content, will someone leave feeling that they've learned enough about a topic to help achieve their goal? That's probably the most important one. Thinking about back in the day, you could pump out these 350 page or 350 word posts, and Yoast is ranking it all green and it's all good. And really today, you've got to be able to help Google not have that searcher go back to the search engine and type in their query again in a different way. Google wants one-click experiences where the searcher clicks, they get to a place, they get the information, everything's all good, and they don't have to repeat that search. So really, does your content help that searcher not go back to Google and conduct another search? And then ultimately, last one here is, did a reader have a satisfying experience? And I think that that's very collective in terms of the content, in terms of the site experience, and all the other different metrics that we've been talking about.
Brett, you mentioned your SEO agency years, and I forget that whatever year that was, but if it was a while ago, because earlier in my SEO career, to bullet point number 1, brand search wasn't factored into Google's search algorithm. You really had this like separation from brand queries and non-branded queries, and all the effort was around non-branded. Now, I'm sure you've heard, like Google, there's a piece of the algorithm, almost like links, in which how many times your brand name is searched actually matters, because that's almost like a vote. Why would you search for a brand that sucked? So it's very specific. And if you have a high amount, that could help of people searching for your brand. So for the homepage, yes, people come in through articles, possibly advertisers, I would always say, are the ones that look at the homepage. So you want to have it pretty in this content layout and highlighted in certain ways. But I think almost like users now click around more to even like back to a homepage or an about page, or to understand more about the content in which they consume. At least I believe I've seen this trend in which the homepage has become, to your point, really important, or more important, into the picture.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're both in the Phoenix area, and out here in Phoenix, there's Waymos, and Waymos are cars owned by Google. They're driverless cars. There's no driver in them. I love them. They're like the best, the coolest thing ever. And I say that because Google is freaking smart. Like when it comes to recognizing the authority and the brand recognition of a topic, you know, I've been in the minority for many years to talk about how unlinked mentions of a brand really matter. Like if there's an authoritative site that is mentioning your brand and it's not linking over to your site, I don't care. I think Google's smart enough to realize that, to build up that brand. And so, yes, to your point, you know, it's definitely looking at the quantitative things of like how often a brand is actually searched to verify that this is a trustworthy website. But it's also like looking at the where you're mentioned outside of search engines as well, and seeing if that brand is being talked about in different trusted publications.
So great.
Cool. And then this list is kind of the don'ts, if you will, if looking at the Google helpful content update and asking some things that might have worked in the past, but might not work in the future. And so is the content primarily made to attract visits from search engines? You know, that's a gray area. We want to do that. But is it consistent with some of the examples that we talked about today, in that it's not adding more value to the conversation? It's not satisfying what a searcher is ultimately looking for, because we know the goal is to increase organic search traffic, but is there something beyond just increasing SEO traffic, beyond the purpose for creating that content? Number 2 here is, are you producing lots of content on many different topics in hopes that some of it might perform well in search results? I think that that's been the strategy. It's to get a content pillar and go really deep and broad and try to cover that topic as a whole. If your site is known really well for that topic, I still don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think that that's a really valid approach, and that's what a website should be all about in terms of content production. But I think that this bullet point in question really goes back to one of the examples we talked about earlier, where you have a site that's talking about blockchain and recipes and automotive and things like that. So it's going really deep into the stuff that your readers actually want to read on your website. Are you using extensive automation? We'll see how that plays out. Like, quite honestly, again, dust needs to settle before I think that we start to see how automation impacts websites, because again, Google's been pretty vocal of saying that, hey, AI content is kind of okay, but it goes back to all these other different things that make it so that, to Lindsay, to your point, that's the baseline. What else are you doing to raise the bar? Are you mainly summarizing information? Are you writing because things are trending? Do readers feel like that they need to search again? We talked about that. Are you writing to a particular word count? So that one, you know, there's been a lot of tools that have emerged over the years where it's like, well, here's the top 30 search results, and the average of those top 30 search results is 2,100 words. So you need to write 2,100 words. I think that it really goes back to get an expert to write your content, make sure that they have the authority on the content, and then produce great content that adds additional value to the conversation. And then last one, did you write without any real expertise? Again, I think that this doesn't really bode well for the SEO agency model. I think that it's getting to know who the writers actually are who are producing this content, and perhaps adding to what that content production looks like so that you are having real experts contribute content to your site and adding value to the conversation.
And one of my first publisher jobs, I will never forget a comment from a user. This was like back in like 2000, maybe 13, 14. And the comment said something like, I don't think I'll be taking legal advice from a website that also tells me the best dog names and a recipe to bake a cake. So yeah, that recipe, it made me think of that. But I never forgot that quote, that we were all these different things and no one was going to trust that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay.
Cool. So some last considerations here. If we want to go to the next one. So I think that the Google helpful content update, that's the core of what we're talking about today. That's something that was released in August. And I would actually like, if there was a poll feature on here and I was to poll everyone, I'd love to see what has happened to organic search traffic in the last month for everyone, because Google, came out with this update in August. I think that in general, when they came out, they actually came out a little harder than where they usually come out with algorithm updates. And I think a lot of publishers started to see their traffic fall off a little bit. In May at Google's I/O conference, they announced that they were going to slightly tweak the helpful content update. And I think that universally, the sites that I've been tracking and have been seeing have upticked as a result. So again, black box with Google, you never know really what's going on. But I think that with the helpful content update, they're continuously trying to figure out what is expertise. How do we determine expertise for people who are authoring posts? What's authoritative and trust really when it gets down to it? So I think that they're continuously tweaking with this, and you'll continue to see it evolve. But in the meantime, some other things that, again, I think this audience is pretty familiar with is the Google Core Web Vitals update. I think that came out in like 2021 sometimes, but really does the site load fast? Can you interact with the content? And does the content shift too much to create a poor user experience? So I'm sure that everyone has invested in that area, but if you haven't, then that's just a good reminder. Internal linking, that's another pretty obvious one when it comes to SEO 101, but don't sleep on them. I think that's probably one of the most underutilized tactics and strategies when it comes to SEO, is really having a solid internal link structure to make sure that your content is found and discovered by search engines and as well as readers. To Lindsay's point, many other site visitors now are more curious and they're poking around different sites because they've come to a destination and it's like, they want to discover what else is there for me here. So internal links can help them discover that content. Having a good sitemap is kind of in the same vein of that, to make sure that crawlers can discover the content that is being created, having good page title tags, and then just creating good helpful content. So in case you didn't know, now you know. That's the PSA.
That is great. Completely agree about internal links.
Yeah. And then last one here is the getting to know EEAT. And so I think that for this audience, everyone has heard of this acronym and it's pretty familiar. If I wanted to level up and challenge everyone here, the EEAT is really experiment with it. And going back to what I was talking about of, you've been producing content in one way for a period of time. What's that next innovation look like? Are you recruiting experts within your field and inviting them to guest post on your website and going to measure the traffic difference that if you invited someone who's known in the industry and that person's sharing that information, like how much of an impact does that make on traffic, and how well does this feed into what Google's putting out there in terms of EEAT? So I think that especially when you get down to the topics that are in your money, your life categories, such as health, financial stability, safety of people, welfare or well-being of society. If you think about those particular topics, to Lindsay, to your point, if I'm getting legal advice, that's a site that you want to hear from a lawyer. You want to hear from someone who went to law school. So I think that especially if you're in one of those categories, I'm sure that you've been experimenting with it, but ask yourself, what is that next experiment that could lean closer into this? Because I think that this is ultimately where organic search is heading, beyond all of the generative piece and the generative noise that we've been seeing, but perhaps they're both blended. If you look at Google's Bard product announcement, generative piece up here, right below that is a Quora search result, and then another result from like an ed tech company that had expertise about the query. So how can you be right underneath that and really support that? And I think that the answer is right here in this acronym.
Yep, this is great. I often tell publishers to use the search results as like the best free tool to see the top ranking sites. Sometimes you can't tell exactly the authority they get from brand strength or backlinks from that view, but you can at least take a look at like the types of things they're including on the page. Do they all like most top ranking videos for recipes these days have videos in them? That's a signal probably that users value that in that particular niche, and to like gain what you can from what Google's doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wanted to take it a step further, it's going into some of the view page source information and looking and seeing how they're structuring their content. Are they putting different meta information in there about the authors and things like that? So you could learn a lot by looking at not only what ranks, but also what's in these product announcements from search engines. And so if you see, Google announce something and cite an example, you could actually go to that example site, look at the page source, inspect the elements, and figure out, what does Google actually like about this? Should I take something from their example and then incorporate it into my own content on the back end so that we can see if that actually makes an impact?
Yeah, that's amazing. All right.
Cool. And then last slide right after this one. So next steps, just to wrap it up, self-assess the content. We went through like 21 questions today, at least, to self-assess content. So incorporating that into some editorial guidelines. Have others you trust, but who are unaffiliated with your site, provided an honest assessment. That's one, especially good if you have a newer site and you're just getting your bearings on what kind of content to create. Focus on people first content, avoid creating search engine first content, getting to know EEAT and the quality rater guidelines, create helpful content, and then monitor and measure the results. So that's the good call to action. I'm sure that there's a lot more questions than answers in 2023 when it comes to SEO and organic search, but hopefully this helped ignited some additional questions and inspires you to go find some answers.
Thank you so much, Brett. I had a great time today. It was so nice to talk to someone who has the experience and sees such similar things as I do and works with publishers and tries to really press upon the importance of quality content. We need to all be contributing to making the web a better place and a more user-friendly, soft place with accurate and useful and usable information for people. So this is great. If you have any follow-ups, do you have an email you want anyone to reach out to you with if they're interested, or you want to say your website again?
Yeah. What's on the next slide? I think I might have a email address there.
Oh,
I even
nice.
got my cell. Hit me up on a text. No, yeah, feel free to reach out at any time. Like I said, I don't have any skin in the game when it comes to SEO stuff. So happy to just share knowledge and rap. It's what I geek out on. And I mentioned that I was an accountant to start my career. So all the numbers and data that goes into SEO strategies, I always love to talk shop and see what people are doing.
Perfect. All right. Well, we look forward to hearing any follow-ups or questions. And thank you all so much for joining today. We will soon be announcing our next month's webinar. And thank you so much.
Cool. See ya.
Bye, Brett.
Brett, we just got a question actually.
Okay.
There's some lingering people on, so I'll go ahead and ask it from the audience. Some of us here come from entertainment and gaming and publishing. Curious how you would approach at a glance. With so many video game shows, movies constantly releasing, how would you approach a loaded calendar of valuable topics with limited resources? The question continues. Could you rank for 3 different topics? Would you double down on one, spread the love across all 3? That's the question.
I think there's a lot more follow-up questions I would have with that. So the first thing I would ask is basically what's Google telling you in terms of what they want to see more of from the site. So within those 3 different categories, where do you have the most momentum? And basically determining, what are the keywords that you're ranking for? What are your top traffic websites? Things like that, and dive in a little deeper. Perhaps there's one out of those 3 that emerges, and I would probably double down on that one that has the most momentum, and then still look to innovate and create content on the other couple categories. And again, I think that the thing that I've been leaning into for this one is within lifestyle, entertainment, video games. There's a lot of people who want to express and share their knowledge. And there's ways that you can essentially get those people to contribute content with limited resources so that you can satisfy those other couple areas. And so rather than, if you do double down your internal efforts on the one area that you think will have the biggest impact, you could still make progress by opening up the site to people who have expertise and want to share that content. So I think that's the approach I would have with that.
Great. And then we have one more question if you have the time.
Of
At what
course.
point would you concentrate more on page load time, like page speed, versus updating content? In other words, how much does bad page load affect your ability to drive audience?
I think that one goes back to how bad the page load time actually is. And so if it's a incremental improvement, then maybe it doesn't matter as much. But the way that you could determine that is by looking at the Google Search Console. You could look at Google's page load speed or that tool that they have. And if it's like really high in the red, you've got to be able to chip away at that. Especially if you're especially if the majority of your traffic is on a mobile device and you're looking at that's going to be a really poor user experience, and that'll probably have the biggest negative impact in terms of driving organic search traffic. So I would most definitely lean more towards the site load time if it's significant. And if it's just a minor, I just have to get passing to the CLS, or not the CLS, the LCP, so many acronyms, the LCP stuff. If you could just, get that passed, I think that it would be then beneficial to look at the updating the content as a secondary.
I agree that it has more to do with how much. There's some just good optimizations I've seen publishers do over the years, like paying for a good hosting company can make a big difference in some of the speed, and also things like moving your images to WebP if they're really heavy, or compressing them better. That are those kind of things that are worth it regardless, that maybe as you evolve your site and as you do iterations of your site, can make a difference in speed. And then again, I agree, if it's within like a second and it's not noticeable to a user and Google's not out of control in the red on their reports, content is a long game, but it's one that will pay off, I believe, as you move forward. If the bulk of website's content is high quality and offering the things that Brett's talked about here today, that will pay off, I do believe, for brands in future years.
Awesome. We have a couple more actually. Since we're on a roll, this is super great. How much of an impact have you seen individual author authority play in the success on a niche website with the new EAT guidelines?
I'd love to know. Like that's basically what I've recommended in this, because I think that it's too early to call it, but I think that that's what needs to happen as an experiment, where you do have that author with expertise and maybe multiple authors with expertise, and then do an A/B test and see if you have an author without that expertise who ranks as well. and see how that performs over time. I think that that's really the message that I wanted to convey today is if you get those authors with that expertise, I think that's going to bode well for the future.
I think this is
Great.
one of the harder ones. Sorry, I'm like equally answering.
No,
Sorry.
that's fine. Yes, go ahead.
I think this is one of the harder ones to prove any sort of direct correlation, because it's slow and it takes time, and it's because users are looking to see there's like a behind the scenes signal, I think, between a user staying on pages longer, like those engagement signals when they trust a page, and they may just be viewing a name, and is somebody's name just by the name recognizable? That would help ease the trust, so they scroll on. Is the date at the top, so they scroll on? There's these factors on the page that gain as you go trust. And then of course behind, for you should be, I completely think you should be filling out author bio pages. News websites like the Times and big authoritative news websites, there's some of the longest bios I see consistently for author bios, because it's not, I don't even know if it's, I guess it's your money, your life news content, but it's very protected by Google as to who they trust with the news.
That's super interesting. Maybe you see author profile optimization start to happen, because like if you think about what we were just talking about the depth of content on blog posts, like author pages are some of the most shallow pages that you've seen. It's like 1-3 sentences. People have their Twitter bio basically there, but if you have like the actual story behind it, that could be really interesting.
And just speak to how, yeah, it's definitely not a word count thing, more like people are really trying to explain their experience and get it across to the user any way that they can.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
And I think
All right, guys.
just to finish that thought, just measure everything. Have metrics in place, and whatever experiment you run, just make sure you're measuring it.
Awesome,
Great.
awesome. Only interrupting here because we have another question. What's your take on one easy optimization many publishers neglect?
Lindsay, you want to take that one?
Wait,
Oh,
sorry, the question continues. Extended bios in a separate post, almost like a short background on the person, something we're trying. This is from one publisher.
Cool.
that's good. The what's it called? Author bio pages, like the full landing page, let them be indexed. That's fine, I think. To the first point, oh man, it's not easy anymore. That could be one thing to take away. There's not like a quick fix kind of thing. I think the use of organization of the post, I continually see sites could do better, where it's like a big block of content that's either like so this is like low lift. You can format a page, and also heading tags, incorporating some organization into the post. Users are on their phone. I don't want to read a whole block of article. I'm very deterred from continuing with like a little larger font, 2 to 3 sentences, and then a break. You format and put in some heading tags, and then do go in when you think into like in depth into the topic. The user can scroll with their thumb and get to where they want to see it.
Yeah, and I was going to add maybe the one optimization thing that is most neglected for publishers or for websites might be internal linking. I think that internal linking, because it's so hard to automate and do right, and because it requires some like manual efforts. Think back to the core of why Google was founded. It was founded on PageRank, and it was founded on the more links that are pointing to a website, the higher that it ranks. And it's still true today. Like linking is probably one of the most important factors, because it's one of the hardest things to manipulate, hardest things to automate and do. And at the same time, it's also really hard to do internally. So making sure that your internal structure is correct, that each post that you're putting out there has some sort of internal link, stuff that's being done on the editorial side, so that it is natural, it's not so formulaic. That stuff is just hard to do. And because it's hard to do, that's why it's effective.
Structured data, that I'll throw in that last one. Structured data as a third one. I think when you can tell Google or through code, the more you can tell them about your business, your organization, what's behind the page, the better, the less they have to guess and kind of extract and go through your code.
And that stuff is super geeky and super effective. Like we've been, as a Q&A platform, we've been experimenting with QA schema, and
Yes,
QA schema is almost as long as the post itself in terms of when we're putting it in there. And it's amazing. It adds another line another line within the search engine result pages. It's increased our click-through rates for ourselves and for our publishers by 20%. And so it's painful to get right, but once you have that structured data that's right and incorporated and rolled out in a really good way, it has a huge impact.
I have more coming in. Can you talk a little more in depth about QA schema for those who aren't as familiar with it?
Yeah, so QA schema is structured data that communicates to search engines that the content is question and answer content. And so it's typically used on forums. It's really unique for us because all we do is question and answer content. So that's why we utilize it. So most people, if it's not question and answer type of content, the better form, there's another form of schema that you could mark it up with that's not that. And I forget the name of it, but it's something that you basically just communicate to search engines and categorize it so that when you're looking at who's answering the stuff on your page, there's actual author information that's associated with each one to say, this person's name is this, their company is this, their job title is this, and it gives a more complete understanding of where the information is coming from so that collectively search engines can help categorize it.
Great. Okay, does anyone else have anything? I think these questions have been so relevant to other publishers too, so thank you for asking them. Sorry that I'm coming in here like the Wizard of Oz. I wasn't camera ready today, but most of you, it's Lauren, the VP of Marketing. But thank you all again for joining. Brett, thank you, and for staying on for these this Q&A that ended up taking place. It really was, I think, super helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
So much
Good
fun.
stuff, y'all.
Thanks,
All right, y'all.
everyone. Have a great
Have a
rest of
great
your
day.
week.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.